one of the topics that always comes up with Mars also is what about water? So the facts on that are that yes, there is water on Mars, but it's all frozen, so you're not going to find any flowing water or lakes or rivers or anything like that. And there's also evidence that it once flowed. So there is evidence that water once flowed on Mars. So it's a curious thing that maybe at some point in the past, Mars is actually warmer than it was now, so the water wouldn't have to be frozen. So those are your quick up facts then on the famous question about water on Mars. Yes, there is water, but it is frozen, and there's evidence that it did once flow. So you see things like this, just looking at the internet, no serious research being done here. This is sort of the inside of a crater wall here on August 1999, and about 6 years later, it was photographed again, and you can clearly see that something's sort of falling down there, maybe in the crater, maybe it was sort of buried in this region here, and by some weakness or gravity or some tremor or something, it's just sort of fell down there. So you just sort of see these features happening that are reminiscent of some things we do see on Earth, which is water falling, or not flowing though, but it would just sort of be some ice that maybe broke off and fell. And these poles that I mentioned are kind of interesting here. So the carbon dioxide that I mentioned on the top here is really contained in a thin sort of surface layer. And again, that's because the poles are so cold, and so the carbon dioxide will freeze on top of these poles here and just sort of stick. But what's under these carbon dioxide layer here is, of course, frozen water. So the poles then would be a big source of water under that carbon dioxide layer, and the carbon dioxide layer here, again, isn't very thick here. I think in some estimates here it can be something like even maybe 10 meters thick, but it's definitely what you would find first, and then the water would be underneath it there, and you see a small polar cap down there as well. And it definitely has the southern cap as well, has a similar sort of southern pole of carbon dioxide layer, followed by a bunch of frozen water below. And right then on the surface, so this is sort of a wheel mark made by one of the Mars rovers that's up there right now, and then sort of that sort of white stuff that you see here is frozen water. So you see if you're on Mars and you needed water, it seems like it would be right below the surface, some of that iron oxide regolith that's on there, but you'd have to then somehow melt it, and it might be a bit toxic and that sort of thing. But there's where the water would be. So yes, there is water on Mars. And this is sort of recently discovered here. I'm going to say maybe in the late, maybe 2010, somewhere around there like that, just a huge crater filled with, you guessed it, H2O. So there's stuff like this on Mars, and probably a lot more of these sorts of features to discover, but the answer to water on Mars is an absolute yes. The other thing that you see is in some of the geology features, the evidence that water once flowed are features like this here, where you just sort of see these maybe erosion lines and that sort of thing that are definitely just evidence of the exact same thing we see on Earth where water once flowed. So this is a top-down view here, but you just see all these etchings and things like that where maybe water was just flowing around in rivers around these higher mountains, if you will, here, carving out things that look just like water flowed. So again, evidence it once flowed. And you can see things like this. These are definitely going to be those impact craters here, maybe filled with some lava like some of the things we saw on the moon. But then when you look at features like these things in here, these definitely look like erosional marks from water. Like maybe this was an ancient lake right here, and the water sort of flowed out in little tributaries and rivers and that sort of thing. So it definitely looks like the water once flowed on Mars. And you can clearly see then some runoff channels like this. They just look like maybe there's a very deep river right here that would just start to run off and flow into tributaries. So it'd be hard to say, well, no, that didn't happen from something like water flowing. Okay. I think I showed you a picture similar to this before, and this would definitely be water here too. And I sort of passed by a quick factor on a previous slide, which I'll tell you now. So abrupt start from high pressure underground. So some of this water, the ice, might be forced out by some high pressure underground that is under the Martian surface like this. And when that happens, it sort of might come out in a process like that. It definitely looks like it's just sort of coming out from this source and getting larger as it goes. Okay. The other thing that's sort of evidence of water flow on Mars is things called blueberries here. And what these blueberries are what blueberries would look like on Earth here. I think these were found somewhere in Utah. And, however you want to think about it, sort of a rock getting round like this, if you sort of have a rock that's rounded like that, it might have happened when a bunch of water was always flowing around and sort of etching away its sides until it got nice and round. And these were found on Mars here, sort of in a small scale, but some of these blueberries are found on Mars too. So they're sort of formed by water flow on Earth. They might also have been formed by water flowing on Mars. And just some more pictures you can look at here. This is on Mars, but some of the features look just like we find on Earth here. Gullies formed by water running down the crater walls. Not now, but maybe in the past. Okay, and so in the next video, we'll get to what about this story about life on Mars.